The restaurant was one of those upscale places with mood lighting and overpriced wine. The kind of establishment where my husband Preston liked to be seen. We sat across from each other at a corner table. The anniversary dinner he'd insisted on planning, despite my suggestion that we order takeout and stay home. 15 years of marriage deserved something special, Preston had said. Something memorable. He'd been right about memorable, though not in the way either of us had anticipated. I'd noticed something was off the moment we arrived. Preston was fidgeting with his napkin, checking his phone repeatedly, ordering wine with an unusual nervousness that didn't match his typical, confident demeanor. As a corporate attorney, Preston was usually unflappable, the kind of man who commanded rooms and intimidated opposing counsel. But tonight, he looked almost anxious, and I couldn't figure out why. "Is everything okay?" I asked after the waiter brought our appetizers. He seemed distracted. Preston took a long drink of his wine, then set the glass down with deliberate precision. "Actually, there's something I need to tell you. Something important." The tone of his voice made my stomach clench. This was the voice he used for difficult conversations, for delivering bad news to clients, for announcing decisions that weren't up for discussion. "I've been seeing someone," Preston said, his words dropping into the space between us like stones into still water. "For about 8 months now. Her name is Scarlett, and I'm in love with her." The restaurant noise faded to a dull roar as I processed what he'd just said. 8 months. Not a one-time mistake or a moment of weakness, but an ongoing relationship he'd been conducting while coming home to me every night, while sharing our bed, while pretending our marriage was intact. "I wanted to tell you in a public place," Preston continued, apparently interpreting my silence as permission to keep talking, "so we could discuss this like adults without things getting emotional or messy. I think we can handle this divorce civilly, split assets fairly, and move forward with minimal disruption." He actually smiled slightly, as if he'd just proposed a reasonable business arrangement rather than announcing the destruction of our 15-year marriage. "I've already spoken with a divorce attorney about the process. We can use mediators, keep this out of court, make it as painless as possible." I stared at him. This man I'd been married to for 15 years, who was calmly discussing divorce logistics in a public restaurant after casually announcing his affair. My initial shock was being replaced by something colder and more calculating. "Say something," Preston prompted when I'd been silent for what felt like an eternity. "Anything. I know this is shocking, but I'd rather be honest than continue living a lie." I took a sip of my wine, buying time to collect my thoughts and control my voice. When I spoke, my tone was remarkably calm. "I appreciate your honesty," I said, watching surprise flicker across his face. He'd clearly expected tears, anger, some emotional scene he'd have to manage. "Though I'm curious why you chose tonight, our anniversary dinner, to share this news." Preston had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. I thought it might soften the blow, doing it at a nice place on a special occasion, making it clear that I still respect you and our years together, even though I'm choosing to move forward with someone else. The rationalization was breathtaking in its self-serving logic. He'd thought destroying our marriage at an anniversary dinner would be kinder than doing it at home, as if the location somehow mitigated the betrayal. "How considerate," I replied, my voice still eerily calm. "And this divorce you've already consulted an attorney about? I assume you have a settlement proposal in mind?" Preston actually looked relieved that I was being rational about this. "I do. I think we can split assets fairly. The house can be sold, investments divided equally. You'll get spousal support for a few years while you re-establish yourself professionally." Re-establish myself professionally. As if my career as a financial consultant was something I'd let lapse rather than something I'd strategically built over 15 years while supporting his partnership track at the law firm. "That sounds very fair," I said, still maintaining my composed demeanor. "Though before we discuss specifics, I'm curious about Scarlett. How did you meet?" Preston's face lit up in a way it hadn't when looking at me in years. "She's an associate at the firm. Brilliant, passionate about the law, completely dedicated to her career. We started working late together on a case, and things just developed naturally. An associate at his firm. which meant she was younger, likely ambitious, and probably saw Preston's senior partner status as attractive as much as the man himself. "How old is Scarlett?" I asked. 31, Preston replied, and I did the mental math. 16 years younger than him, 20 years younger than me. Young enough to still believe that a married partner leaving his wife was romantic rather than predictable. "And she knows you're announcing this tonight? That you're asking me for a divorce?" Preston nodded. "She's been patient, waiting for me to handle this properly. She deserves to have our relationship recognized openly rather than hidden." The selfishness was stunning. Scarlett deserved recognition for helping destroy my marriage, and Preston deserved credit for handling the destruction properly by announcing it in a public place where I couldn't make a scene. "I see," I said, taking another sip of wine. "Well, I appreciate you being direct, though I think we should probably skip dessert. This seems like the kind of conversation that doesn't require prolonging." Preston looked almost disappointed, as if he'd expected more discussion or negotiation. "So, you're okay with moving forward with the divorce? With settling things amicably?" "I didn't say that," I replied, my voice still calm, but with an edge. Preston didn't seem to notice. "I said we should skip dessert. As for the divorce and how we proceed, I think I'll need some time to consider my options." I signaled for the check, and Preston paid with his credit card while making awkward small talk about the quality of the meal. We drove home in separate cars. He'd come straight from work, while I'd met him at the restaurant, which gave me time to process and plan. By the time I pulled into our driveway, the initial shock had fully transformed into cold, calculated anger. Preston arrived a few minutes after me, apparently having stopped somewhere along the way. He looked relieved that I hadn't caused a scene at the restaurant, that I seemed to be handling this rationally. He had no idea what was actually coming. "I'm going to stay in the guest room," Preston announced as we entered our house. "I think it's appropriate given the circumstances. We can start discussing logistics tomorrow when we've both had time to process." "That makes sense," I agreed. "Though Preston, just so we're clear, when you consulted with that divorce attorney, did you happen to disclose your assets fully?" He looked puzzled by the question. "Of course." "Why? And you told them about the offshore accounts? The property investments held through your brother's LLC, the partnership bonus structure at your firm?" Preston's face went carefully blank. "Those are complicated financial instruments that aren't relevant to basic asset division." "Interesting," I said. "Because I'm a financial consultant, and I'd say they're very relevant to asset division. Along with several other financial arrangements you've made over the past few years that you've kept separate from our marital finances." I saw the moment he realized I knew more than he'd assumed. His expression shifted from confident to wary. "We can discuss all of that with our respective attorneys," he said carefully. "I'm happy to be transparent." "I'm sure you are," I replied. "Now if you'll excuse me, I'm going to bed, in our bedroom, alone. As I apparently have been in many ways for the past 8 months." I left him standing in the hallway and went upstairs to the master bedroom we'd shared for 15 years. Once inside with the door locked, I allowed myself exactly 5 minutes to cry. Not for the marriage, which I'd realized tonight had probably been dying longer than I'd wanted to admit, but for the wasted time and the version of myself who'd trusted so completely. Then I dried my eyes, opened my laptop, and began working. Over the next 3 hours, I compiled comprehensive documentation of our marital assets, Preston's separate accounts, and the various ways he'd been systematically moving money into arrangements that would be difficult to trace or claim in a divorce. I wasn't surprised by what I found. I'd been tracking his financial movements for 2 years, since I'd first noticed irregularities in our joint accounts that suggested he was preparing for something. I'd hoped I was being paranoid. Tonight, confirmed I'd been prescient. By 3 in the morning, I had a complete financial picture of our marriage and Preston's attempts to hide assets. I also had documentation of his relationship with Scarlett, gathered through the private investigator I'd hired 6 months ago when my suspicions had become too strong to ignore. I'd known about the affair for half a year. Preston's announcement tonight hadn't been a shock. It had been a confirmation and an opportunity. The next morning, I got up early, and made coffee. Preston emerged from the guest room looking tired and uncertain, clearly not sure how to navigate morning after announcing your affair etiquette. "We should probably discuss next steps," he said, helping himself to coffee. "I think we can handle this efficiently if we're both reasonable." "Absolutely," I agreed. "Though I think we need to address some inaccuracies in your asset disclosure before we discuss settlement terms." I slid a folder across the kitchen counter. Inside were printouts showing Preston's offshore accounts, the LLC holdings, the bonus structure he'd negotiated that deferred significant compensation in ways that would be hard to claim as marital property, and several other financial arrangements he'd thought were hidden. Preston's face went pale as he flipped through the documents. "Where did you get this?" "I'm a financial consultant," I reminded him. "This is literally what I do professionally. Trace money, uncover hidden assets, analyze complex financial structures. Did you really think I wouldn't notice you were systematically moving money into vehicles designed to minimize your divorce exposure?" "This is private financial information," Preston said, his lawyer instincts kicking in. "Some of these accounts are attorney-client privileged." "Actually, they're marital assets," I corrected. "Created during our marriage, funded with income earned during our marriage, and deliberately hidden from your spouse. That's called dissipation of marital assets, and courts take a very dim view of it." I pulled out another document. "I also have documentation of your relationship with Scarlett, including the fact that you've been using marital funds to pay for hotel rooms, dinners, gifts, and weekend trips. That's also dissipation of marital assets." Preston set down his coffee cup carefully. "What do you want?" "I want what's fair," I replied, "which includes a complete accounting of all assets, reimbursement for funds you spent on your affair, and a settlement that reflects the actual value of our marital estate rather than the artificially reduced value you've tried to create." I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how much I actually knew and what my leverage was. "If we fight this in court, it'll get ugly and expensive," Preston warned. "Attorney's fees alone could consume a significant portion of our assets." "True," I agreed. "But I'm not the one who's been hiding money and conducting an affair." "You are. Which means you're the one with exposure to judicial scrutiny of your financial and personal conduct." I let that sink in before continuing. "Courts in this state can award me more than 50% of marital assets if they find you've been engaging in financial misconduct. They can also require you to reimburse me for money spent on your affair. And if they determine you've been deliberately hiding assets, they can impose penalties that are quite substantial." Preston's jaw tightened. "You'd really drag this through court? Expose everything publicly?" "I'd prefer not to," I said honestly. "But I'm not going to accept a settlement based on incomplete financial disclosure and generous offers of support for re-establishing my career that I never abandoned. So, you have a choice. We can mediate this with full transparency about assets, or we can litigate this and let a judge decide who's been acting in good faith." I poured myself more coffee, letting him process. "I should mention that I've already consulted with an attorney, Patricia Vance. She specializes in high-asset divorces, where one spouse has attempted to hide money. She's very good at what she does." Preston knew Patricia's reputation. He'd been on the opposing side of one of her cases 3 years ago and had watched her dismantle his client's financial obfuscation so thoroughly, the judge had awarded the wife 70% of marital assets plus penalties. "You've been planning this," Preston said slowly, realization dawning. "The investigator, tracking our finances, consulting with Patricia. You've been preparing for this divorce." "I've been preparing for the possibility," I corrected. I hoped I was wrong. "But I'm a financial consultant who specializes in following money trails. When you started moving assets around 2 years ago, I noticed. When you began having suspicious late nights and business trips 18 months ago, I paid attention. And when you started spending money in patterns that suggested you were maintaining a relationship 6 months ago, I hired an investigator." I met his eyes directly. "You weren't as clever as you thought, Preston. You just married someone who understands finances better than you do." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Preston had always been the powerful attorney, the dominant personality in our relationship. He'd made more money, had the prestigious career, commanded rooms with his presence. But he'd underestimated me completely, assuming I was the supportive wife who managed our household finances without really understanding the complexity of his financial arrangements. "So, what now?" Preston asked, his voice tight. "Now you decide whether you want to settle this fairly or fight it publicly," I said. "Patricia has prepared a settlement proposal based on actual, marital assets, including everything you've tried to hide. It's fair but significantly more expensive for you than the proposal you mentioned last night." I slid another folder across the counter. "This includes full asset division, appropriate spousal support based on our actual income and lifestyle, and reimbursement for funds you dissipated on your affair. If you agree to these terms, we can finalize the divorce quickly and quietly. If you don't, we file in court and everything becomes public record." Preston opened the folder and went pale. The settlement was substantial, roughly 65% of marital assets to me, plus 3 years of spousal support that would maintain my current lifestyle, plus reimbursement for the estimated $75,000 he'd spent on Scarlett. "This is excessive," Preston protested. "You're punishing me financially for the affair." "I'm asking for what I'm legally entitled to based on your conduct," I corrected. "The 65% reflects the assets you attempted to hide and the court's likely view of that behavior. The spousal support reflects our lifestyle during marriage, which I should be able to maintain post-divorce. And the reimbursement reflects money you took from our marriage to fund your affair." I stood up, ready to end this conversation. "You have 3 days to decide. Accept these terms and we move forward amicably through mediation. Decline them, and we file in court, where Patricia will present all of this evidence and likely get me an even more favorable judgment, plus your legal fees." I headed toward the door, then turned back. "Oh, and Preston, you might want to mention to Scarlett that your financial situation is about to change significantly. Whatever lifestyle she was expecting you to provide might need adjustment." I left him sitting at the kitchen counter, staring at the settlement proposal that was about to cost him significantly more than he'd planned. Over the next 3 days, Preston tried various approaches to negotiate. He called Patricia directly, attempting to use his legal expertise to find weaknesses in our proposal. Patricia shut him down efficiently, pointing out that every term was well supported by state law and his documented conduct. He tried emotional appeals, calling me to discuss our marriage and whether this was really what I wanted. I responded that he'd made that decision when he started an affair and then announced it at our anniversary dinner. He tried intimidation, suggesting that fighting this would damage my professional reputation. I reminded him that I wasn't the one who'd been hiding assets and conducting affairs. That particular reputational damage was all his. On the 3rd day, Preston's attorney called Patricia to accept the settlement terms. The process moved quickly after that. We used mediators as Preston had originally suggested, but with full financial disclosure and the settlement terms I'd proposed as the framework. Everything was documented, verified, and filed legally. The divorce was finalized within 2 months, remarkably fast given the asset complexity. I received 65% of marital assets, including Preston's share of the hidden accounts he'd tried to protect. The total value was approximately $4.8 million. I also received 3 years of spousal support at $75,000 annually and reimbursement for the affair-related expenses. Preston was left with approximately $2.2 million and significantly reduced earning capacity since he'd structured his partnership compensation in ways that now worked against him. The irony of his own financial cleverness becoming his downfall wasn't lost on anyone involved. The day after the divorce was finalized, I received a call from someone I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Hartley? My name is Scarlett Meadows. I think we should talk." I almost declined, but curiosity won out. "All right, where would you like to meet?" "There's a coffee shop near the courthouse. Can you meet me there in an hour?" I agreed, wondering what Preston's mistress-turned-girlfriend could possibly want to discuss. Scarlett was younger than I'd imagined from Preston's description, probably closer to 28 than 31. beautiful in that fresh-faced way that requires minimal effort, dressed in a professional suit that didn't quite hide her nervousness. "Thank you for meeting me," Scarlett said once we'd gotten coffee and found a quiet corner. "I'm sure this is uncomfortable." "That's one word for it," I replied. "What did you want to discuss?" Scarlett took a deep breath. "I wanted to apologize for the affair, for my part in destroying your marriage, for not asking more questions about Preston's situation before getting involved with him." She paused. "And I wanted to warn you about something, though it might be too late now that the divorce is finalized." "Warn me about what?" I asked, intrigued despite my wariness. "Preston lied to me," Scarlett said. "About everything. He told me his marriage was already over, that you and he had been living separate lives for years, that the divorce was just a formality you'd both been putting off. He made it sound like I was helping him finally move forward from a dead relationship, not destroying an active marriage." She looked genuinely distressed. "I found out the truth about a month ago, that you'd had no idea about me until he announced it at your anniversary dinner. That he'd been lying to both of us, playing both sides, keeping his options open while preparing financially to divorce you on terms that would benefit him." Scarlett pulled out her phone and showed me a series of text messages. They were between Preston and someone named Austin, apparently Preston's close friend from law school. The messages were damning. "Scarlett's great, but I'm not ready to walk away from my marriage until I've got my finances protected," one message read. "Need another 6 months to move assets before I can file for divorce without losing everything." Another, "Wife's a financial consultant, but she trusts me. Doesn't question anything. By the time I announce the divorce, I'll have everything positioned to minimize her claim." The messages were dated over a period of 18 months, showing Preston's calculated plan to conduct the affair while systematically hiding assets before announcing the divorce. "He used both of us," Scarlett said quietly. "He used me as an emotional affair partner while setting up his financial escape, and he used you by keeping you in the dark while he prepared to divorce you on his terms." She looked at me directly. "I wanted you to know that I'm not with him anymore. When I found out what he'd actually done, the lying, the manipulation, the calculated betrayal, I ended things immediately. That's not the kind of person I want to be with, regardless of his money or status." I studied her, this young woman who'd been as much a victim of Preston's manipulation as I had been, though in different ways. "Why are you telling me this now? The divorce is finalized. Whatever Preston planned, it didn't work because I caught him first." Scarlett smiled slightly. "I know. Your attorney mentioned during settlement discussions that you'd been tracking his financial movements for 2 years, that you'd hired an investigator 6 months ago, that you'd basically been 3 steps ahead of him the entire time." Paused. "But I thought you deserved to know that it wasn't just spontaneous or the result of us falling in love like he claimed. It was calculated, strategic, and fundamentally dishonest toward both of us." I appreciated her honesty, though it reinforced what I'd already suspected. "What will you do now?" "Transfer to a different firm," Scarlett said immediately. "I can't work there anymore, not after everything that's happened. My reputation is already damaged. People know I had an affair with a married partner. I need a fresh start somewhere that doesn't have that history." We parted ways cordially. 2 women who'd been manipulated by the same man and had both emerged from the experience wiser, if not unscathed. The next several months were strange. I had to adjust to living alone after 15 years of marriage, to managing a household solo, to rebuilding a social life that didn't revolve around Preston's career and connections. But I also had financial security, professional autonomy, and freedom I hadn't fully appreciated during my marriage. I threw myself into work, taking on complex cases that required the financial forensic skills I'd used to uncover Preston's hidden assets. My reputation in that specialty grew, and I started receiving referrals from divorce attorneys who needed expert witnesses or consultants for cases involving hidden assets. 6 months after the divorce, I received a surprising call from Patricia Vance, my attorney. "I have a potential consulting opportunity for you," she said. "Major divorce case, high-profile client. Husband has been systematically hiding assets for years. The wife needs someone who can uncover everything and present it clearly for court. I immediately thought of you. The case was fascinating and challenging. The husband was a business executive who'd been even more sophisticated than Preston in hiding money, using offshore trusts, shell companies, and complex investment vehicles to obscure the true value of marital assets. It took me 3 months to unravel everything. But when I presented my findings in court, the judge was so impressed by the thoroughness of my analysis that he awarded the wife 70% of assets plus penalties against the husband for financial misconduct. That case led to others. I became known in legal circles as the financial consultant who could find hidden money, no matter how clever the hiding. Attorneys started calling me early in their divorce cases, hiring me to conduct preliminary asset investigations before their clients even filed paperwork. My income tripled within a year, ironically making me more financially successful post-divorce than I'd been during my marriage to a successful attorney. I also started teaching seminars for women about protecting themselves financially in marriage and divorce. How to maintain separate credit, how to track household finances, how to recognize warning signs that a spouse might be preparing to leave, how to document everything. The best defense against financial betrayal, I tell audiences, is knowledge. Know where your money is, know where your spouse's money is, and maintain your own financial identity even within a marriage. Trust is important, but verification is crucial. A year after the divorce, I ran into Preston at a professional conference we both attended. He looked older, tired, less confident than I remembered. "Hello, Preston," I said when we found ourselves in the same conversation circle. "How are you?" "Fine," he replied shortly. "You?" "Excellent," I said honestly. "Business is thriving. I've been doing financial forensics consulting for divorce cases. Turns out my experience uncovering hidden assets is quite valuable to others going through similar situations." Preston's jaw tightened. He clearly got the implication that my success was built in part on the skills I'd developed catching him. "I heard you've been doing well," Preston said stiffly. "Congratulations on your success." "Thank you," I replied. "Though I should probably thank you as well. If you hadn't tried to hide assets and conduct a calculated divorce, I might never have discovered how good I am at financial forensics. Your betrayal was actually a gift in that sense." The irony clearly wasn't lost on him, but before he could respond, someone else joined our conversation, and the moment passed. Later that evening, I saw Preston having an intense conversation with another woman at the bar, probably someone new he was pursuing. I felt nothing watching him, no jealousy, no lingering hurt, just a mild curiosity about whether he'd learned anything from our divorce, or if he'd repeat the same patterns. 2 years after the divorce, I was invited to speak at a conference for family law attorneys about identifying financial misconduct in divorce cases. The keynote presentation was well attended, and during the Q&A session, an attorney asked a question that brought everything full circle. "You've talked about recognizing the signs that a spouse is hiding assets." The attorney said, "But what about emotional signs? What made you suspect something was wrong in your own marriage before you had financial evidence?" I considered the question carefully before responding. Honestly, my husband became predictable. His patterns shifted in ways that suggested he was building a separate life. He stopped sharing details about his work. He became defensive when I asked about finances. He started treating our marriage as something to maintain, rather than something to nurture. I paused, making sure the audience understood what came next. But the biggest sign was when he announced his affair at our anniversary dinner and expected me to be grateful for his honesty and willingness to divorce me amicably. The arrogance of that moment, the assumption that I'd passively accept his narrative and settlement terms, revealed everything about how little he understood me or respected my intelligence. "What did you do?" the attorney pressed. "I stayed calm," I replied. "I didn't make a scene or cry or beg him to reconsider. I simply thanked him for his honesty and said I'd need time to consider my options. Then I went home and spent 3 hours documenting everything I'd been tracking for months. Every hidden account, every suspicious transaction, every piece of evidence of his affair and financial misconduct." The room was completely silent, everyone listening intently. The next morning, I presented him with comprehensive documentation of his attempts to hide assets and dissipate marital funds. I showed him I'd been 3 steps ahead of him for years, and I gave him 3 days to accept my settlement terms or face public court proceedings where all of his financial and personal misconduct would become public record. I smiled slightly. He took the settlement. My divorce was finalized within 2 months, and I walked away with 65% of marital assets plus spousal support plus reimbursement for affair-related expenses. His calculated betrayal became my financial security. The response was enthusiastic applause. After the presentation, dozens of attorneys approached me with questions about their specific cases or requests for my consulting services. By the end of the conference, I'd booked 6 new cases and established connections that would shape my career for years to come. 3 years after the divorce, I bought a house. Not a marital home we'd chosen together, or a space filled with compromises, but a place that was entirely mine. A converted warehouse loft with high ceilings, exposed brick, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. I furnished it with pieces I loved, hung artwork that spoke to me, created a home office that reflected my professional success. The day I moved in, my best friend Naomi came over with champagne and takeout. To new beginnings, she toasted. To freedom from men who don't deserve you and success built on your own terms. I'll drink to that. I agreed. As we ate Chinese food sitting on my new couch, Naomi asked a question she'd been holding for 3 years. Do you ever regret it? How you handled the divorce? Going nuclear on Preston instead of just accepting a settlement and moving on? I considered the question honestly. No, because accepting his settlement would have rewarded his manipulation and left me financially vulnerable. By fighting for what I deserved, I not only secured my own future, but also established myself professionally in a way that's created ongoing success. I took a sip of champagne before continuing. Preston thought he could control the narrative, manage the divorce on his terms, and walk away relatively unscathed while leaving me with just enough to survive. But I didn't need to survive. I needed to thrive. And that required fighting for actual justice, rather than accepting whatever scraps he was willing to offer. Naomi smiled. You're kind of a badass, you know that? I'm someone who refused to be underestimated, I corrected. Preston's mistake was assuming I was passive, trusting, and financially unsophisticated. He forgot that I'm literally a financial consultant who specializes in tracing money. That oversight cost him dearly. 4 years after the divorce, I received an unexpected email from Preston. The subject line read simply, "Apology." I debated not opening it, but curiosity won out. Hannah, the email began, using my first name rather than any term of endearment. I've been in therapy for the past year, working through a lot of issues including how I handled our marriage and divorce. My therapist suggested I write to you, not to seek forgiveness or reconciliation, but to acknowledge what I did, and take responsibility for it. The email continued. I was arrogant, manipulative, and fundamentally disrespectful toward you. I treated our marriage as something I could manage and control, rather than a partnership requiring mutual respect and honesty. I conducted an affair while systematically hiding assets because I was more concerned with protecting my financial interests than with being honest or fair. Preston's email went on. You were smarter than me. You saw through everything I tried to hide, documented my misconduct, and built a case that forced me to accept consequences I'd been trying to avoid. That wasn't vindictive or cruel. That was appropriate accountability for someone who'd spent years lying and planning betrayal. I don't expect forgiveness, the email concluded. I just wanted you to know that I recognize what I did was wrong, that I've spent 4 years facing the consequences of my choices, and that you deserved much better than how I treated you. I hope you're happy and successful, because you earned both through your intelligence and strength. I read the email 3 times, looking for manipulation or hidden agenda, but finding what seemed like genuine remorse. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I sat with it for a week, considering whether Preston's apology meant anything to me at this point in my life. Finally, I sent a brief reply. Preston, I appreciate you acknowledging what happened. I've moved forward with my life and career, and I'm genuinely happy. I hope therapy helps you, Become someone who treats future partners with more respect and honesty. Take care. I didn't need his apology, but I appreciated that he'd finally understood what he'd done and why my response had been appropriate rather than vindictive. 5 years after the divorce, I was featured in a business magazine article about women who'd transformed personal adversity into professional success. The article detailed my journey from supportive wife to divorce survivor to successful financial forensics consultant. Hannah Winters has built a thriving practice, helping women uncover hidden assets in divorce proceedings, the article read. But her success stems from personal experience. Her own ex-husband tried to hide millions in assets before announcing his affair and requesting an amicable divorce. Winters not only uncovered everything but secured a settlement that gave her financial security and the capital to launch her consulting business. The article included my advice for women facing divorce. Document everything. Trust your instincts. Hire experts who specialize in financial investigations. And never accept the first settlement offer, especially if you suspect your spouse has been hiding money. The publicity from the article generated even more business. Attorneys across the country started reaching out, hiring me to consult on cases involving complex asset division or suspected financial misconduct. I was traveling regularly, presenting expert testimony in courts, teaching seminars, and building a reputation as the foremost expert in divorce financial forensics. 6 years after my anniversary dinner revelation, I was invited to speak at a women's conference about resilience and transformation. Standing on stage in front of 500 women, I told the story of that dinner. Preston's casual announcement, his expectation that I'd accept his terms, his complete underestimation of my intelligence and preparation. My husband announced his affair at dinner, I said to the audience. He chose our anniversary at an upscale restaurant, thinking the public setting and special occasion would make me compliant and emotional. He expected tears, compliance, grateful acceptance that he was being honest by telling me he wanted a divorce. I paused, making eye contact with women throughout the audience. He didn't expect my response. He didn't expect that I'd known about the affair for 6 months through a private investigator. He didn't expect that I'd been documenting his financial misconduct for 2 years. He didn't expect that I'd already consulted with one of the most aggressive divorce attorneys in the state. Most importantly, I continued, he didn't expect me to fight. He assumed I was passive, trusting, and financially dependent. He forgot that I was a financial consultant who'd been tracking his money the entire time. That oversight cost him 43% of marital assets he thought he'd successfully hidden. The response was thunderous applause. After the presentation, dozens of women approached with their own stories. Husbands who'd underestimated them, divorces they'd fought through, strength they'd discovered when pushed beyond their limits. "Thank you for sharing your story," one woman told me, tears in her eyes. "My husband just announced he wants a divorce, and I've been feeling powerless. But you've shown me that I have more control than I thought, that I don't have to accept his narrative or his terms." I gave her the card for Patricia Vance and several other divorce attorneys I'd worked with. Document everything, hire experts, fight for what you deserve, and remember, his underestimation of you is his problem, not yours. 7 years after the divorce, I was genuinely happy. My career was thriving, I'd built genuine friendships and community, I owned a home I loved, and I'd learned to value my own independence and strength. I occasionally dated, but I was cautious about serious relationships, having learned valuable lessons about trust, verification, and maintaining personal autonomy even within partnerships. One evening, having dinner with Naomi at a restaurant that coincidentally was near where Preston had announced his affair 7 years earlier, I reflected on how much had changed. "Do you ever think about that night?" Naomi asked, reading my mind. "When Preston dropped the bomb at your anniversary dinner?" "Sometimes," I admitted, but not with pain or regret, more with a kind of dark satisfaction that he played himself so completely. I took a sip of wine before continuing. He thought he was being clever, controlling the situation, managing me. He had no idea I'd been managing him for years, documenting everything, preparing for the possibility that our marriage would end exactly as it did. He underestimated you completely, Naomi said. That was his fatal mistake. Yes, I agreed. But it was also the gift that transformed my life. If Preston had been honest, if he'd valued our partnership, if he'd treated me with respect,